Okay, so moving forward, in this part, we're going to look at the geometry of the mouth. And let's just do this quickly and jump right into it. Okay, so what we're going to do is sort of look at this area as a cutout so that we can really get an overall view of the whole part. Let's actually extend that down to the chin. Two birds with one stone. So here we're going to just pretend we're sort of sculpting into a slab of clay. And here, obviously, we have a bit of a cylinder shape, right? So it kind of follows along this way, but then it tapers off to be smaller over here. It doesn't taper off here because the geometry still is over here. So when you shade it, you wouldn't just put the highlight up here. You would kind of put it over on this whole thing and let it transition into shadow down there. So it's like a sort of long piece of cylindrical clay going to the corners of the mouth. So same thing up here. It's a bit of a curvature. It goes up and around. And again, also tapering like this. But in this case, it doesn't go all the way because now there's a divot here. Now it's like there's two cylinders like that over here, like a double barrel shotgun. That's always fun to say, double barrel shotgun. And then from here, we'll talk about negative space for a second. If we take a sphere and we took that sphere and put it right here, the negative space that the sphere will be making, if you're to press that ball into clay, is going to be the inverse of that sphere, right? So we have the negative space of a sphere. We could say even a cylinder because it goes extended like that. And it kind of branches out. And from there, it goes back into a positive shape. So from negative shape to positive shape. It's very important to understand this geometry so that you know exactly where the highlights are going to be. Anything that's facing away won't be receiving light from the light source. And then the tricky part here, well, it's not too tricky. This is going to harken back to our first lesson in terms of the donut shape. It's as though you have let's go over here real quick. It's as though you have like a clay block like this, and you took some kind of arrow and you went and pressed into that clay. What's going to happen is it's going to make a little dent, but if you press further and further, the negative space of the arrow will be left. So as a result, pressing into that clay, you'll have sort of like a little puncture, and the geometry does something like this, where it's like a whirlpool going in to the shape. And because of that, if there's light coming from over here, there's going to be light hitting these shapes, but not over here. That's going to be in shadow. And then the transition between them. Right? And that illusion of shapes receiving light and not receiving light will help a lot with the corner of the mouth. Because if we look over here, it's a little bit organic compared to what we just did. It's as though we're taking that arrow and then pressing that in to the face a little bit. And as a result, you have the indent here and the geometry doing that. Pretty simple, barely an inconvenience. I'm going to keep using that, stealing that line from Ryan George, whatever. So mixing this information, we can say that we can connect all this stuff with some connective geometry like that. And then the wireframe will do something like this. And of course, these two cylinders will have a connective thing like that. And it looks like a bit of a mess right now, but let's try to translate that to actual 3D forms. Okay, so the first one we're going to do it the same order that we did in terms of the analysis is the lower lip. It's like a cylinder. We could even start with a little cylinder and then put the wireframe on it. But this part is going to be extended outward. It's like we're taking this polygon and extruding it to the left. And then also at the same time, making it smaller. So it's almost like a cone. And then what you want to try to do is do that same thing on the other side. And of course, we're going to be including that indent here. So you could even just put a circle on both sides in perspective if you can, and then draw the geometry kind of going outward. That's out of order, but that's fine. And by the way, the more you render the shadow on this part, the more the person will look like they're smiling. Anyway, so let's do the top lip, just also a tapered cylinder, going like that. But of course, we're actually going to introduce a little bit of an emphasis of a point in the middle here. So it's a cylinder, 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 and it gets really low right there for a little bit, and then back up again. I exaggerated it a little bit for the sake of the demo, but that's kind of what we're looking at. All right, and now we have these two shotgun shells up here, or barrels, and we're going to do the wireframe on it. But instead of just doing the wireframe by going in like this, we're going to make them a little bit pointier at the peak here, and then go in and connect as if there's a connective geometry between them. And since we know that cylinders will have that core shadow here and showing the form based on that shadow, we can now, just as a quick example, say that there's going to be a shadow here and a shadow there. And, you know, there's going to be stuff in shadow over here as well. Might as well just shade the rest of this while we're here. Underside over there. And now you can see how quickly you can get the illusion of the lips just by understanding the form. But let's do the other parts as well. So we'll just connect this and then that as well, and sneak in some geometry. Well, wireframes. Do take note that this shape that we made is kind of like a little bird. Also dictates the shape of the top of the lip. Not for everybody, it's different, but in this case, that's sort of what it's doing. Okay, earlier we talked about the negative space happening here based on the sphere. And so we're gonna go out with that first cylinder, and then in, and then out again. And this certainly ties in with our studies of the skull. The barrel of the mouth goes out, then in, then out again for the chin. You could even put a sphere here. For the chin. And then you can connect everything. And then we know that the sphere will have that core shadow along this. There'll be a shadow here, and this part will be in shadow as well, since it's... Now, granted, we're not doing an accurate study. It's even at a different angle, but the point here was to understand the geometry of it. Let's actually try to add some highlights on it as if it's sort of like a statue, so really bright highlights. Just gonna add the jaw real quick.